Welcome to the best beginner-friendly guide on how to grow Nepenthes. So if you've been watching my videos and thinking, oh my gosh, these plants look so amazing, where can I buy them, what species should I get, and how do I grow them? Okay, slow down a little, because in this video, I'm going to be explaining all of that. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is Nepenthes care, and I believe it's the most important because you want to know what you're doing before you go out and buy your first Nepenthes. So we're going to be talking about light, watering, soil, and humidity. So in terms of light, I grow my plants outside so they get moderate light because they sit under this umbrella stand. I've moved them over to this end because I find on this side the plants get burnt by the full sun, which is what these brown patches are. I'll try my best to explain indoor setups as well, but I would recommend you go watch Windowsill Nepenthes guides because he grows all his plants on a windowsill and he'd have sort of a better idea than me. But in my opinion, if you're growing your plants inside, you should either sit them on a windowsill or have some good quality grow lights. I've seen many people put them in a grow tent. I've seen others put them in their bathrooms for humidity. So in terms of watering, I would generally recommend you water your plants when the soil is about to dry out. So we're not talking keeping the soil wet at all times because that will just totally rot your plants, which is basically when the sort of stem and roots turn into brown mush, which is never good. And we're also not talking about letting the soil totally crisp up and dry out because that can also sort of mess up your plant's roots. So what you want to do is sort of every week or so, you want to feel your plant soil, and if it's very wet like it is now because I've just watered them, you don't want to give it more, but this one might need it because it's a very large plant. If it's just moist, if you can feel it about to dry out, then it's a good idea to give your plants some water. For humidity, I've found out that if you keep your plants closely packed together, humidity's not really that much of an issue. But if you're growing really highland plants, I'd recommend an indoor setup with about 70 or 80% humidity. Some people keep them in terrariums, but I'm not really into that. I just have a sort of plastic box downstairs under a grow light where I keep my seeds. So that's basically the bare minimum for growing plants in high humidity. I reckon my average humidity outside is about 50 or 60%. So for beginner plants, you don't really have to worry about humidity at all. And for soil, I've seen lots of people make this mistake. So beginners, they just use potting mix, which is very deadly. If you didn't know, carnivorous plants, the only reason they exist is because they've evolved to capture bugs because they grow in very low nutrient soil. So you want to use components like peat moss and perlite, sphagnum moss. So for my sort of harder growing plants that are really hard to grow, I use exclusively sphagnum moss and perlite. But for the easier beginner plants, which is what this video is for, I use a mix of coir peat, sphagnum moss, orchid bark, and perlite. You could just use peat moss and perlite, but I find adding those extra components really boosts your plant's growth. The next topic we'll be talking about is where to buy Nepenthes. Now you might get lucky and find some beginner species at your local nursery, but the best option that I definitely recommend is buying from a reputable online website such as triffidpark.com.au. And they generally have some of the best beginner species. This topic sort of merges with the next one, which is what species or hybrids should I buy? Triffid Park, I know, is selling this right now. This is, I think, the best beginner Nepenthes for anyone trying to get into the hobby. It's called Nepenthes ventrata. I'll spell that out, Ventrata. And this is a hybrid of Nepenthes ventricosa and Nepenthes alata. I have a Nepenthes alata right here, and this is a Nepenthes ventricosa. Ventricosa is also a very nice beginner species, And something I always tell people is if it's crossed with ventricosa, it's easy to grow. So I also have some other examples of ventricosa hybrids. Here's a ventricosa cross truncata. I'd recommend this plant to anyone that likes larger pitches, which is pretty much everyone trying to get into the hobby right now. This one's a bit harder to find, but if you get your hands on it, it should be easy to grow. This was my first plant, Nepenthes Rebecca Sopa, or Ramaspina cross ventricosa. Yeah, this one has very nice purple pitches. They're not for everyone. I know some people don't like it. Yeah, so another thing I'll explain right now. So we finished the topic of sort of species and where to buy them. This is a difference between upper pitches and lower pitches. So you'll hear these terms tossed around a little bit in the Nepenthes hobby, and you might be wondering, what on earth is upper and lower pitches? So I'm here to explain that right now. So a lower pitcher is a trap on either a basal shoot, like this on a plant, or just on a younger plant overall. So generally you'll see the tendril, which is that stem coming out of the pitcher at the bottom. The tendril will come out of the front of the lower pitcher. And these traps will generally be sitting on the ground, and they'll be much larger than the upper pitchers. So the upper pitchers, they'll have that tendril coming out of the back. They'll generally be lighter in colour or less colourful. I'll compare them on my Roco here and my red leopard. I'll show you that after. So that's a lower pitcher on my Roco, which is quite large. And then there's this more green upper pitcher on the same plant. So you might be thinking, oh, these leaves are bigger, this vine is thicker, but as you can see, it's just a shoot coming off the main vine. And over here, this is my Nepenthes red leopard. You can see the lower pitches here, and the upper pitches are just pure green or yellow, depending on what you see in the camera. And another thing I'll explain, there's going to be lots of these little explanation segments. This is what a flower on your Nepenthes looks like. So it looks like corn on the cob. Here's another one right here. Most people think these pictures are actually the flowers, they're just modified leaves basically. And a basal shoot, which I sort of briefly showed you before, is when your plant's main vine sends out a little offshoot at the bottom right here. You can always cut these off, but I'd recommend you cut the main vine and take cuttings, because the basals generally grow larger because they have the root system. Nepenthes don't have very large root systems, but the pitches will be much larger from the basals. So that's a little section of explanations finished. The next thing we're going to be talking about is feeding your Nepenthes and overpotting. So most people, when they get their plants, they think, oh, I have to manually feed this thing because otherwise it's just going to die. That is not the truth. Unless you're keeping your plants in a closed terrarium with literally nothing for them to eat, you don't have to feed your plants at all. The only instance where I'd feed them is if I have a bug in the house that I really want to get rid of, but they generally feed themselves. So I'll show an example of that. Right here, there's sort of ants swarming a pitcher on my Nepenthes ventricosa cross truncata. You can see them running around there. And they'll just fall in by themselves and feed the plants. So you really don't have to worry about feeding. And the last thing I'll be talking about in this video, if there's anything I forgot, you can always leave it in the comments below. The last thing we'll be talking about is overpotting. So some people, when they get their plants, they'll say, oh, I'll just put it in a really massive pot and then I don't have to ever repot it. That is not true. The soil breaks down over time, it compresses, and it can cause slower growth in your plants, it can stunt the growth, etc. So you really want a pot that fits the size of the plant, which is generally, this is a good example, you want your pot to be about the same size as the plant's leaf span, which is from leaf tip to leaf tip, if not a little bit less. So you can see right here, this plant might need to get repotted soon, but as I said, they don't really have that large of root systems. So overpotting is generally much bigger of an issue than underpotting. So if you only have a small pot when you get a big plant and you think, oh, I have to go out and buy a new pot so I can repot this thing, you really don't have to. You can just put it in a small pot and it'll be fine. So as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.